Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. And so many nonprofits with this wonderful mission and world-changing potential destroy that potential because of risk aversion and fear. And we talk about, in addition to the growth mindset, even in the preface, we talk about the personal qualities needed to drive a successful organization.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Donald Summers. Donald, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Mallory, thank you for having me.
I'm excited. We are talking about your new book, Scaling Altruism, and I want to just get into the meat. But let's start with you sharing with everyone a little bit about you, who you are, what brings you to this conversation, and what the book is about.
Before I do that, allow me to thank you for doing the work that you do. Fundraising is an incredibly noble profession, and it's joyful. And from what I've learned about your incredible work, you show a lot of people how to do it right. So first of all, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody in the audience. Fundraisers for nonprofits are the best people. We're all altruists. So it's just a joy to be with you, and it's a joy to connect with this audience. And the reason that brought me to this work, I grew up very suspicious of business and also really mortified at all the problems that finance capitalism was creating in the world. And that drew me to the nonprofit space. And out of an accident, I got an education in business and finance and really hardcore entrepreneurial methods. And I've spent my career kind of taking the tools of business and that intimidating, scary stuff that's out there, drives these startups and major corporations, that nonprofit people are completely justified in going, don't like that. That's bad. And I've spent my career showing people how those tools are not immoral. They are amoral. You can repurpose those tools for good. Okay. So in my career as a fundraiser, I've been positioning my organizations as social impact enterprises that have an ambitious goal and are sophisticated and capable and do very high quality work. And they have clear plans, and they're transparent, and they're accountable. And when you can adopt that footing and speak the language of business and entrepreneurialism and finance and have those conversations with people outside the sector, you become very powerful, and your organization becomes high growth, and you make the world a better place. So that's my philosophy, and it's taken me a long time to get there. And I really appreciate why people in the sector are perhaps tentative, or they don't want to be in business for a very good set of reasons, right? And we're just trying to give them access, democratize access to these sophisticated tools in a way they can use them. So that's what's driven my career trajectory. And ultimately, it's what drove me to create a process and a system that is now open source, if you will. Everything that we've learned in our firm of driving these growth and impact, we've now articulated that, and it's out to share. And that's why I'm here talking with you and your audience to say, hey, take a look. Hopefully this stuff helps you. It's a different approach. And maybe that's just a little bit of I hope I'm not talking too much, Mallory, but hopefully that gives you a good overview of where I'm coming from. It's a different place, and why we're talking today.
Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about, the book obviously is filled densely with a ton of really actionable advice for folks. And it provides, I think, a really good kind of like undercurrent and tone setting at the beginning around some of the like mindsets, but also, I don't know, sort of like cultural elements that are required in being able to ultimately implement the strategic framework that you're talking about too. So will you first sort of tell us what the steps are that you outline in the book, but then also that relationship between sort of, maybe I'm not sure if culture is the word that you would necessarily use, but the culture and strategy component.
It's a quote that's not Peter Drucker's. It's misattributed to him, but he's famously thought to have said culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's true. So the book is divided into 7 chapters, which are 7 phases of organizational growth and development. And it's a step-by-step process. And we say you have to do it in order. And much as you know, fundraising becomes a challenge if you're not ready to fundraise, right? If you don't have your ducks in a row. But what we do is make it very clear and specific about which thing comes first. And the very first thing that we talk about, all those 7 chapters are subdivided into little practices, little bite-sized things that you have to get right before you go on to the next practice. And absolutely, number one, the first one is make sure everybody on the team has a growth mindset. And there's a link to the articles in there. There's professors at Harvard Business School that write about growth mindsets. It's a big thing. You can take a deep dive on what it means to be a growth mindset. And like everything else in the book, we boil that stuff down to just the thumbnail that you need to understand. And here's where you are in the right column. And if you have these mental traits, you need to check your head, literally, before you even bother. He wasn't a very good person, but he was a tremendous business leader. And he's an example of someone who used very powerful tools for good and for ill. But you consider the famous industrialist Henry Ford. Brought us many good things, and he had lots of deep flaws, right? But Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. And so many nonprofits with this wonderful mission and world-changing potential destroy that potential because of risk aversion and fear. And we talk about, in addition to the growth mindset, even in the preface, we talk about the personal qualities needed to drive a successful organization. I don't care if you're running a for-profit or a nonprofit or a government agency or an institution. These are common to all organizations. You've got to have courage to even be in the seat. You've got to have optimism to think you're going to be able to win. You've got to have grit because it's going to be really hard. You have to have focus, and you have to work with urgency. And so we try to thumbnail all of those things and say, make sure you have that growth mindset. And if you don't have them, then it gets down to the next truth, which organizational change begins with personal change. And if you've got leaders and decision makers that aren't ready for the journey and aren't ready to take risk and make themselves vulnerable on behalf of the vulnerable people that they're serving, right? It's going to be hard. So that's why we start with that. And yes, that's incredibly important. The book is primarily strategic and technical. However, we do understand that culture is an incredibly important thing. We've got a lot of things in chapter 7 around leadership and culture. But you're 100% right, Mallory. We got to think we can win. We've got to act selflessly. If we're going to succeed as nonprofits, we have to put others before us, right? It's the fundamental tenet of altruism. So couldn't agree with you more. Mindset. Having that growth mindset is critical. And that's practice number 1 in, the very first steps of the process.
And then how can you go through sort of the tactical steps as you've outlined them in the book? And there was something we were talking about before we clicked record that I'm hoping sort of can get weaved in there, which is the role of the fundraiser. I mean, as you were talking about culture and that leadership piece, like one thing I hear so often from fundraisers is, I can't do that because I don't have leadership support around blank, right? Or I can't even, something that came up really recently on a coaching call was I doubt my leadership's ability to actually fulfill this offering that as the fundraiser, I'm being asked to put in front of donors, right? And so fundraisers are so, I think because they are being asked to be very vulnerable and, connect on these like deeply personal levels, they also then feel this tremendous obligation to ensure that what they, promised in that funder meeting actually comes through to fruition. And they don't always feel like they have sort of quote unquote control on that being the case because of their role as the fundraiser. So will you talk about that sort of interwoven in these pieces?
Boy, you hit the heart. You hit things at the heart, Mallory. You've been doing this a lot, I can tell. Fundraising is a team exercise. And the incredible thing about fundraising, yes, it's sales. And some people reject that label. The mechanics are sales. But the heart of fundraising is evangelicalism. You're making the world a better place. And if you believe in your mission and your ability to carry out the mission, fundraising becomes the most powerful, self-fulfilling. You do it anyway, right? Mm-hmm. getting to that state where the fundraising team truly believes in the mission, truly understands the social return on investment. They're able to use the same disciplined tools that every investor looks for, ROI. But you can say, here's our return on investment, not just in economic terms, but in social, in moral, in environmental, in cultural, and having that strong value proposition that you believe in, and then functioning as a team. So when you bring in the dollars, your program folks can show you what happens, and your board is helping bring in new leads. When everyone and your CEO when it all comes together, that requires a team. And so often, as you know, the fundraisers are put in silos and say, go find the money, right? And then they're constrained. Their performance is constrained because they're siloed. They're not supported. They're not sure. There's blockages and constraints happening in other parts of the organization. And this is exactly why I wrote the book, because fundraising is interconnected with everything. If you've got to get everything right, from understanding, from governance, from strategy, from your key performance indicators to your execution, your program team, it's all got to work together. And that's the big challenge for leaders, is the solutions are all in silos and different pieces. Getting together an organization to work well involves putting many puzzle pieces together and getting everything to work in sync. And I believe, other people have tried to articulate all the things you have to do in the right order. That's why it's taken me 10 years to figure this out, another 5 years to write the book. I think, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm a know-it-all here, but I've been through this cycle hundreds of times of taking organizations that were stuck or suffering from these constraints and putting them through this transformation process. And as a result of that constant study with plenty of failure, tons of error correction, I've been, as I write in the book, I have calluses on my butt from all the butt I've taken, right? So there's no arrogance in this. I've just stuck with it. If I have one quality, it's tenacity, and I just want to figure out the formula. So what we show, there's a reason that fundraising is chapter 5, right? First, you have to have an organizational assessment where everyone benchmarks. Here are the critical success factors for a high-performing organization. Most boards and executive teams know some of them, but not all of them. And they don't put themselves through a robust diagnostic. And the old school SWOT analyses are slow. There's a much faster, better way that's really targeted. And we have a dimension and a toolkit for that. And then you have to get everybody on the team. Chapter 2 is alignment. Take your typical board and ask them to write down their goals and strategies on a Post-it notepad. That's an exercise in the book. Boy, are you going to get stuff all over the road. Like, what's a strategy? People have different ideas of even what a strategy is. They don't know that you have to have a program, an impact strategy, and a growth strategy. So you got to go through all of these things. Chapter 3, then you have to write a business plan that says, and it's not, theory of change ain't gonna, that dog doesn't hunt. I'm sorry, folks. Theory of change, show me some proof, okay? You got a theory, come back to me. You're not ready to fundraise on a theory. You need proof. Logic model, come on. Business plan, keep it simple, right? Talk to people outside of your bubble, right? Nobody outside the nonprofit space knows what a theory of change is. It's not robust, they're complicated. So we're trying to, out of due respect to the people that are well-meaning, that are trying these planning tools, we have a much more robust, much more humble, specific, hey, do it like this, no fancy jargon. And then you got to test that business plan. You got to make sure you have partners and stakeholders, and you're in a collaborative, not a competitive landscape. And you got to go through all that work. And then you have to define your revenue strategy before you go out. Is it contributed? Is it earned? Is it invested? Contributed has 5 different buckets: individuals, foundations, corporations, government agencies, right? And there's impact capital too. There's debt. And earned income, half the money in the social sector comes from service and product sales and contracts. Anybody who says a nonprofit isn't a business, time out, people. $750 billion annually is earned by nonprofits in the United States alone. So you've got the capital stack in the nonprofit space is incredibly complex. There's earned, contributed, invested. There's 5 different buckets. Each bucket has subsegments. Individuals has annual gifts, it has major gifts, it has planned giving, it has peer-to-peer, right? And so you got to understand the whole keyboard that's available to your mission, right? And as you counsel, Mallory, people suffer because they do exactly what everybody else does. They go out and they rubber chicken dinners and beg for grants and get on the hamster wheel, and they do the same thing everybody else does. They haven't had, and it's not because they're bad people. They have to really understand the complex nature of all the opportunities and how to go from survival to success. How to go, and you teach this very well. You teach nonprofits to go from survival strategies to success strategies. And if you have all of those things before you, once you get to the fundraising stage, you can be very powerful. You can be evangelical. You can capture what we call not gifts, but investments, social investments. And we call them investments because you're going to show the ROI after the social ROI after it happens, right? And here's the final piece to the puzzle. After you get the money, you got to execute. This is where nonprofits also struggle, is execution with efficiency and effectiveness. It requires, and you're delivering a product or service, and that requires a whole set of managerial principles they didn't teach you in the schools of education, public policy, and social work, right? Very, very few nonprofits actually execute well. So, and fundraisers need that evidence of execution to go back to their donors, their charitable investors, and say, hey, you want to put people on a growth wheel? You want to turn a $50 gift into a $500 gift to a $5,000 to a $5 million to someone's estate? You got to show the results. So I hope I'm not going on too long, but the whole reason for the book is finally to make it clear the entire ecosystem, the teamwork that has to come together. And fundraisers are so off. They're such good people. They're also undercompensated. They're underpaid. How many organizations are trying to hire top fundraisers for $60,000 a year? It just doesn't, that dog doesn't hunt. Okay. So we also talk about how to capitalize these operations and how to incentivize performance. And that fact that one of the biggest barriers to performance for nonprofits is low pay for the staff. That's objectionable. Any nonprofit that has martyrdom in its compensation strategies is doomed to fail.
Oh my gosh.
So many different things have to come together.
Oh my gosh. There's so many layers to what you just said around sort of like the implications of these standard practices that ultimately then impact leaders and fundraisers' sort of ability to do this work well in the way that you're talking about. You know, something kept coming up as you were sort of talking through some of those pieces. I really love what you said around sort of like the theory of change and how I feel like in this sector, we have sort of taken practices like that and sort of claimed or felt like maybe those are the nonprofit versions of things like business plans. And so we've let these kind of like models, right, and myths like override ultimately what the folks on the other side of the table are using to make decisions about whether or not they want to be in partnership with us.
I hope this doesn't turn into a rant, but whenever you get to experience fundraisers together, nonprofit fundraisers that have been in the business as long as we have, danger of turning into a rant. But I hit on a term, and it comes from really respected people. So one of my intellectual people I admire most is Jim Collins, the Stanford professor who wrote Good to Great and Great by Choice. Just creates these crystal clear paradigms for how to run a high-performing organization. And God bless Jim Collins. We love him to death. And then he goes out and writes Good for Great for the social sector and completely distorts everything. And I'll respectfully say he gets it 100% wrong. He falls prey to the myth of uniqueness that the nonprofit sector is this different animal. And he says, well, you can't pay nonprofit people the same as you can for profit. And I say, hooey to that. Look at all these football coaches making big bucks, and these university presidents and hospital. You can pay nonprofit people. You can't have excessive compensation, but you can certainly pay them market rates. And then he says, you can't fire people. Well, you got to get the right team in the bus. And, there's all these myths. And then, you have people like the founder of the nonprofit finance fund says nonprofit finance is unknowable. It's a funhouse mirror and nobody knows how that works. And I'm like, time out. If a nonprofit wasn't following generally accepted accounting principles, they'd get their fees revoked. But this myth and the confusing your tax status with your business model, and no, business rules, not every rule running a private company applies. There's no equity in nonprofit space, right? But most of the basic management stuff around analytics, around team building, around culture, around, evaluation, you can walk it right over. And here's the thing that crushes fundraising. When you define your program in terms that your own little tribe only is the only one that understands it, when you use all this fancy academic jargon or sector specific jargon because you think the other stuff doesn't apply, what are you doing? You're creating barriers to understanding and engagement outside of your little community, right? So if you can't talk to, what's the number one source of wealth creation in the United States among individuals? Starting your own business, entrepreneurialism, right? So you have all these wealthy people, just one of the many revenue sources you can get to, that are looking to give back. Maybe they made all this money and now they're looking to give back, and they're trying to understand how nonprofits are going to use their funding. And they'll put a nonprofit through a process that the private sector calls due diligence. You do your homework. Can this organization handle this amount of money? And when they get this stuff like theory of change and logic models, and there's no clarity to what the organization is going to do, and the organization doesn't understand or misuses basic words like strategy, right? Guess what? No confidence, no trust, no money. So what I got over my inherent aversion to business practice, because I'm like, I need to explain when I spent 10 years as a frontline fundraiser for small and big organization. And I raised lots of money, much more than the organizations I've raised before, because I listened to what the prospects wanted and framed the organization, mission and work in those terms that they could understand. I only had a couple of courses in business school, but I've got a hardcore MBA by listening to what these sophisticated investor prospects want. Hey, look, show me the pro formas. I'm like, what's a pro forma? I remember sitting at the headquarters of Bloomberg in New York City back in early aughts. And one of my very first nonprofit clients created a partnership with Bloomberg, and we got to sit with their executive committee at the whole company with Michael Bloomberg and his top C-suite. And I sat very quietly in the meeting, and everyone around the table was KPI this and KPI that. Who owns a KPI? What's the KPI for this? And I'm like, what is a KPI? And after the meeting, I looked it up. Oh, key performance indicator, right? And then when we came back to them and say, hey, here are KPIs. Wow, the trust that we're able to create in transparency and accountability, we ended up having a very fruitful partnership with that organization. That's a single example how if nonprofits can just learn how other people outside of the nonprofit sector create trust, transparency, and accountability, right? You got to make yourself vulnerable. You got to admit that you're going to make mistakes. You can't all tell, oh, everything's great. You've got to engage in this really courageous conversation that you're not going to get it right the first time, and you need people's help, and you might make a mistake. No, how many nonprofits have those honest conversations, right? All of this has to come together.
I wonder, I'm curious what you're going to think about this question, but what you're talking about is so complicated on like an emotional level, I think, for some fundraisers. Because I think sometimes as fundraisers or nonprofit leaders, we're treated a little bit, or we're talked to sometimes in like patronizing ways by our funders, right? And so I feel like there's this like dance here around this like desire to, I didn't go and get my MBA. And certainly 15 years ago, if I had been told to create a business plan around my nonprofit, I would have been like, why do they have me in this ED role? Like I have
Right.
no skills in order to do that. And then I think there were these like messages. I actually did have a board member though, who sort of took me under his wing, helped me learn like the business model canvas for creating a business. And I did ultimately create a business plan for my nonprofit, but my beliefs about my ability to do that were like, wow, that's way outside of my skill set that I feel like I was once told was necessary to be a nonprofit leader, and also continues to get reinforced by funders and sometimes board members and executives who sort of tell me that those aren't the things that I'm good at, that what I'm good at are the things like the theory of change and not the business plan. And so it continues to like reinforce this cycle of like messaging to us as leaders that then I think makes it so hard for us to get out of that, to say, okay, I hear that what our, funders and community want is for us to be able to put this more sort of robust strategic, direction and plan and, business plan in front of them. And how do I sort of like overcome all the messaging that tells me I can't do it, I don't know how to do it, somebody else should be doing it, etc.
It gets even worse. It's not just the intimidation factor. We talk about in my introduction of my book, I talk about how badly the brand has been tainted. The whole process of management is a field that evolved because slavery was no longer an option. It's a substitute. It has a terrible legacy. The father of scientific management, I'm blanking on his name right now, Fredrickson, would use numbers and data to take the place of the whip. And business tools have been used to oppress populations for many, 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 many years. And so you go to a social change agent and a leader who's trying to solve the problems created by these practices, and they say, come up with a business plan, you're going to have a lot of heartburn, to say the least. There's racial overtones, there's oppressive overtones, there's the fact that they don't teach this stuff in graduate schools of public policy, and the fact that you're intimidated, you don't know the stuff. The barriers to this, Mallory, there's a reason that nonprofits haven't adopted all of this stuff, despite their power. So I want to acknowledge those barriers for people and say, if you're feeling them, it's normal, right? But if you're courageous, you have the courage to say, you know what? I don't understand that. But I'll learn it and we'll figure it out together. And if you have the belief that these tools can be translated, right, and put to good for this betterment of the world and the vulnerable and the environment, the stuff works. So what's necessary, what's next, is to give people access to these tools in a way that they can understand and use them, and they're no longer intimidated because they know what they mean and they know how they're used. That is number one why I wrote this book. Here's the entire playbook, all the stuff that's scary and wrong and bad and tainted. Actually, if you understand what it is and put it to use, it's incredibly powerful. Now, you can pick and choose whether it works for you, but if you don't want to use it, come from a place of information and experience, not a place of hesitation, fear, or ignorance, or some other source, right? And, stop reinventing the wheel. We've known since the Industrial Revolution, we know how organizations grow and get things done. And the nonprofit sector, out of that fear, that fundamental insecurity, the need to define itself as something different, the need to, we're special, we're different. You're not. You're an organization of people like everybody else. And get out. Humans are tribal. We're status seeking, right? And if you want to be an altruist, you got to get out of that tribal, status seeking, fearful mindset. And if you want to be courageous on behalf of other people, look outside your box. So those are some of the reasons, and I don't mean to preach here, but the barriers you're talking about, I don't want to minimize those. They are profound.
No, I really, really appreciate you saying that. And I think it also brings up for folks that, I love that thinking around like this book can empower you with the knowledge so that you're making decisions not from a place of, oh, I just don't understand that and I never will and I can't. And that's sort of like inaccessible to me, versus really empowering yourself with the information to then be able to sort of guide you on the decisions, you make next. And I also think for folks who are listening to this, recognizing that as you start to, take sort of like ownership around your thoughts and your beliefs in certain areas and some of these mindset pieces and your knowledge in these areas, it doesn't mean that the system around you is magically fixed, and that you won't along the way continue to face some of those barriers that reinforce the problems that you're aiming to address in your own personal work, right? No, everybody's not doing that personal work at the same time. And I think what you said before that is sort of like sticking with me around that is that, like when you were saying people are, massively underpaid, and there are sort of like all these other systemic and systematic things that ultimately continue to, dysregulate us, challenge us, make it harder for us to overcome some of the resistance that we feel inside of ourselves. And to just for people to be able to embrace learning like this and growth like this, and know that it's a process, and that there are going to be things that happen in our personal experiences that make us doubt even our ability to perhaps adopt a new framework. And those are the moments when we need to sort of remember that, that all of these things are interconnected, but all we can do is prioritize our own growth and learning journey.
And you continue to say some things that are so powerful and strike to the heart of this very complex puzzle. How do we transform nonprofits from struggling to survive into scalable change agents that solve problems, not nibbling around the edges? That's what we're all about. How do we get high-performing teams that are paid every bit as much as their private counterparts? How do we deliver evidence-based interventions that have adequate funding and that can grow to the size of the problem? We have a few examples of that, but not enough. Let's remain on target why we're doing what we're doing. And what you're bringing up is the cultural and the human dimension of this. The book is strategic and technical, and it says, here's what you do and here's how you do it. There's guides, there's templates, there's toolkits, there's examples, there's a library of additional resources. You have the confidence that many nonprofits, some of our most exciting success stories today, use this methodology. One is threaded through the book. But what you just described is a missing piece that I've been struggling with for many years. How do you get the human support? How do you do this in a community where you're not isolated, where you have, and you can't, this is not a one and done. Nonprofits who translate this management system take 6 to 9 months even to get the basic tools in place. We see hockey stick growth, but that takes anywhere from 9 to 12 and sometimes 18 months, right? So it takes time. And it's hard work. As you know, you've got to have grit and resilience. And guess what? In addition to being tribal, status-seeking creatures, we're also intensely social, right? And you need support. And I've been struggling. Okay, here's this really robust toolkit. And people are like, oh my God, how do I get this done? Well, the book shows how to create that teamwork and the alignment. But what we've also done, and this is a brand new effort, I write at the end of the book that we have to create a support ecosystem. And we have to, the private sector has accelerators, they have incubators, they have mentor systems, they have all this stuff that's out there. The support systems for nonprofits, they're there, but they're not robust enough. If they were, we wouldn't be seeing the challenges we are. So not to disparage all the people that are trying to create support ecosystems, but we need a stronger one and a better one, and one that's more powerful, that equips changemakers for the support to implement these tools. So in the spirit of Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. I've been trying to figure this out for many, many years. Now that we have the recipe, the playbook, we're also creating a support community for change agents that costs, it's run by our nonprofit arm. It costs very little money. There's a nominal monthly fee to join. And we're going to be building a community of changemakers who are, first of all, absorbing this very sophisticated toolkit, right? Some people have called it an MBA in a can for social impact. That's not just about fundraising. It's about organizational design. It's about strategy. It's about metrics and evaluation and governance and all the stuff you need. So you learn it and then you apply it. And as you apply it, we're envisioning a community of support that comes together from many different organizations to say, hey, I'm struggling with this too. And even if we can't struggle on these journeys alone. And we talk about fundraisers being caught in a silo. What if we had a community for ambitious change makers that come together and work through all these challenges? So that's what we're trying to do with the Altruist Accelerator. And I write about it at the end of the book. And by the time, this is the funny part, by the time I had the book written, I still hadn't figured it out. I knew we needed an accelerator. I was still struggling with the old cohort model, which I've only been able to run a couple of because it's really hard to get all these nonprofits together and walk them through this stuff. It's not ready for prime time yet, but I'm also glad to announce for you and for folks listening that we're going to build this online community to grapple with these tools, to embed these tools in your organization, to grapple with the change management process, to get support. We're going to have a curated community of people that very, very robust rules. We want to make it very confidential, very transparent, and really supportive and positive. People who are ready to do the hard work and grapple with these big issues. And hopefully that's the other strategy to help change this field from survival into success. And it's a grand vision, and there's a lot of work to be done. You're doing incredible work your own through your fundraising and the type of work that you're doing with your power partnerships, right? Your fundraising courses. We need more of this. And so we're trying to break down the knowledge barriers and not just give people the tools, but also give them the support. The key piece that I haven't been able to figure out is how to do it really, really well and also for almost no money, right?
Yes.
How many nonprofits pay us hundreds of thousands of dollars to come in and work with them, and they get massive returns because we raise them millions of dollars as a result, right? But only a small fraction of nonprofits can afford that. And now we want to democratize access to these tools. So that's the other message I want to give to you. And I think it really hinges on your comments that all of this is a lot to absorb. You can't do it by yourself. There's very few people that take this approach in the sector. They're doing great work, but there's so many. It's scary and it's new and it's challenging and it's tainted and there's all these. So we need we need to transform the field before we're going to transform the problems that we're working on.
Yes. Okay. That's a wonderful note to end on. Will you tell people where they can go to get the book and also to learn more about the accelerator for those who are interested?
The book is Scaling Altruism. Just Google it. Pops up wherever books are sold. Scaling Altruism. And the website is altruistaccelerator.org. It's our firm's nonprofit arm. And it talks about the book, and there's an online toolkit. It's not just a book. It comes with templates and guides and case studies and examples, and it's very, very clear and practical. So we ask people to start with a book and then go to the website. The accelerator, the public accelerator, has not launched yet. We're just taking signups. It'll launch this summer. And we're going to build that online community where we'll walk people through the book and help them absorb the tools. But Scaling Altruism and altruistaccelerator.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, for walking through all of this with me, with everyone listening. I'm so grateful that this book is going to be in so many folks' hands and start to pull the curtain back around so many things, and love the way that there's synergy in our work around how we talk about alignment and so many other things and that growth mindset piece. So thank you for the work that you're doing for the sector and for nonprofits as a whole, but also for fundraisers, how you're thinking about their role in all of this. I'm really grateful.
Well, I'll close with how I started. I'll thank you for the incredible work you're doing to help organizations capture more resources for their missions. And for all your listeners, thanks for hanging in there. You have a tough job, but there's hope. And I hope you find these resources helpful.